Good morning and welcome to the January meeting of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes from the December 19, 2019 meeting. I move their approval. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Next item of business is my report. A special election 24. This follows the election resignation of Melinda Katz as the borough's district attorney. This special election, along with the primary and general election that will arrive by February 21st. That is also the first deadline for independent spenders to begin disclosing their activities. All campaigns are required to attend the compliance and C-SMART training sessions conducted by CFB staff. The deadline to meet this requirement is March 9th, so I urge candidates and their treasurers to sign up for those sessions listed on our website as soon as possible. If you are a candidate who has yet to sign up for a CFB training session, please do so as soon as possible. Training sessions are also available for independent spenders. I now turn to Voter Assistance Advisory Committee Chair Naomi Zauderer for her report.
Thank you, Chair Schaefer. We have a busy election calendar coming in 2020. As you mentioned, voters in Queens will elect a new borough president in a special election on March 24th. NYC Votes is preparing a voter guide for that election and other important resources for voters. Everyone is looking ahead to New York's presidential primary election in April. City voters face an important deadline that may affect their ability to participate in that primary election in New York's closed system. Voters who wish to join or change parties for the 2020 primaries must do so by Valentine's Day, February 14th. Because most parties in New York hold closed primaries, voters must be registered with the party in order to vote in its primary. Please note that this deadline only applies to voters who are currently registered to vote. Anyone who registers to vote for the first time may do so up to 30 days before an election, and their party registration choice will be effective for that election. The February 14th deadline represents a welcome change to state law. Up until this year, New Yorkers were required to change their party status in the prior calendar year. The Voter Assistance Advisory Committee held a public meeting last month to discuss the general election held in November. We had a lengthy discussion about early voting and how it changed the election experience in many communities. Overall, it went surprisingly well. We also discussed how to further increase voting accessibility by expanding on programs like the American Sign Language translations added in the online voter guide that we piloted this fall. The Voter Assistance Advisory Committee and the board's voter engagement initiative will aim to engage New Yorkers and get them ready for all upcoming elections this year. Please keep up with our activities on social media by following @NYC-Votes. And with that, I will turn it over to Executive Director Amy Loprest.
Thank you. Earlier this week, a group of our executive team hosted a delegation from the Tokyo Electoral Administration. They were interested in the work that we do both in our running the matching funds program and the auditing and disclosure that we get from candidates, and also in the work that we do in engaging voters. We learned from them also. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about something that we spend a lot of time talking about is engaging young voters and getting them out to vote. In Tokyo, they recently changed the age that you can vote, lowered it from 21 to 18, but they still have a problem getting young people out to vote. Also, yesterday, New York One aired a piece that I'm quoted in on an interesting fact in the charter that because the census is done every 10 years, every 20 years, New York City has an election 2 years after just for city council. So in 2021, there'll be an election, and those people elected to the council will only serve for 2 years. They will be run again in 2023 in newly drawn census districts, and New York One analyzed the procedures for that provision. So, and I was quoted in that article, which was on the air yesterday.
Thank you. The next item of business is candidate appearances. We have 2 candidates who are appearing today. The first is Christine Parker. Is Christine Parker here? She is not. All right. If she comes in later, she can go second. The next candidate scheduled to appear is Jumani Williams. Good morning. Why don't you and your just briefly outline the way we proceed. CFB staff will go first with a brief introduction. Then it will be your turn, Mr. Williams, to set forth whatever arguments or facts you wish to convey to the board. There may be some back and forth, also perhaps some questions from members of the board, and then we'll give each side a chance to wrap it up.
Any substantive issues. I'd like to raise the campaign last night at about 4:30 p.m. Dropped off a stack of documentation, and I'd like to address that because I think it bears on whether we'll be discussing the substantive issues today or not.
Sure. Why don't you go ahead and talk about the rules concerning the submission of documents and the chronology of this particular case.
Yes, thank you. Board Rule 1003B provides that the opportunities to submit documentation and information in response to the penalty notice is the only such opportunity, and any information or documentation not timely received shall be disregarded. Under extraordinary circumstances, the board may choose to accept documentation or information not timely received. In a cover letter submitted with this documentation last night, the campaign argues that Mr. Williams' status as a candidate in the 2019 public advocate election constitutes an extraordinary circumstance. However, the documentation submitted relates to transactions occurring as early as 2015. The most recent transaction occurred in October 2017. The campaign was first asked to provide this documentation in statement reviews sent out between June 2015 and September 2017, several years before the public advocate special election. And when something is requested in a statement review, it's also requested in every subsequent statement review if it is not provided. The campaign was also asked to provide this documentation in response to the draft audit report, which was sent in May 2018, 4 months before the Attorney General primary election that created the public advocate vacancy. The penalty notice was sent in March 2019 after the special election was held, and the campaign never requested an extension or indicated that the response submitted on April 30th, 2019 was incomplete. When the campaign informed CFB staff in November 2019 that it was continuing to gather documentation to respond to the notice, CFB staff reminded should be submitted. To accept this documentation now would be unfair to our audit staff, which is currently working on 3 election cycles simultaneously, including more than 100 disclosure statements filed yesterday. But more importantly, it would be unfair to the candidates who comply with the rules and respect deadlines. One of the core principles of the CFB's mission is to keep elections fair by ensuring that all campaigns abide by the same set of rules.
Was my treasurer. I did just want to point out there was in the statement just now said that we did not say that we needed extra time to gather. And then there was a statement that in November we actually indeed did say we needed extra time because we were gathering information.
Can I just clarify that, please? So in November, the campaign indicated that it wanted to reschedule to board appearance in order to gather additional documentation. That was several months after the response to the notice was submitted. When I said there was not a request for an extension, I was referring to the response to the notice itself. The campaign initially submitted what it indicated to be an incomplete response on April 1st. I suggested at that time that they might want to request an extension in order to gather a complete response, which they did. We gave them 30 days. And when that response was submitted, there was no indication that that was incomplete or that the campaign was going to continue to gather documentation at that time. Our first indication of that was in November.
Fair enough. You're both right. We know that those background facts, and I'm glad you clarified that. But let's move on to the substance of the argument.
So one of the extenuating circumstances that I just would like considered, because I very much respect rules, and I actually very much respect CFB. I wouldn't be here without campaign finance. So it's critically important, I think, to democracy in New York City. Not only was I running for public advocate, I've been running for office, unfortunately, for the past about 2 years, also running for lieutenant governor a year before that, and speaker before that. So we've been in campaign mode for quite a number of years. And last year in particular, had to prepare for 3 campaigns and ran 2, a special election in February, primary in June, and general election in November. So I'm not a prolific fundraiser, so the staff I have on one campaign is always the staff I have for another campaign. So running those 3 campaigns plus the lieutenant governors, it was my treasurer right here who was doing all of the work. So we tried our best to be able to run campaigns while gathering the information that was needed. And the only thing we're asking now is that we can have a conversation about the substance and not technicalities, because we do have a lot of the information that was asked for. It just took some time to get it. And actually some of the banks, we had closed some of the accounts, and that took further time because the bank had to go back and really find some of the documentations we were asking for. So just in the interest of what CFB is, we're just asking that we get looked at on what actually happened and not the technicalities.
I mean, what's troubling here is sometimes when documents are missing, they're really hard to get because you have to go to third persons. Sometimes they're individuals. Sometimes they're very small businesses from whom one had a consulting agreement or things like that. And it can be hard to get those people to respond, particularly in some cases, because there are some unpaid bills and they're not so happy with the campaign in question. But here we're mostly dealing with bank statements, and whether the accounts have been closed or whether they're open, getting bank statements is fairly easy to do. And so in response, it's just very troubling that in response to these continued notices that this is, you will not have an opportunity after this to submit evidence, that was ignored and that efforts weren't made at that time to pick up the phone and call the bank or write to the bank or email the bank and say, come on, we need these, here are the records and we need them. And we'd like to hear some response to that.
We very much respected the notices, which is why we kept asking for, I think we asked for extension more than once, and we were reaching out to the banks. Some of these are bank statements. We also had to get refunded checks that some of them didn't have. We also had to get signatures from people, so we did have to track down people to get their signatures. All those documents were actually difficult to get during the process I was going through for the past 2 years. We sat down with the banks, actually. It's when we sat down, finally got in front of someone. They had to go through, I guess, whatever microfiche they had and finally get it to us. But it was a long process to get documents from the campaign account that was closed for some time, including some of the refund checks, including some of the documentation to back it up. We worked hard on getting this, and we weren't just ignoring the rules, because I actually would prefer not to be here making this argument. So, but we were trying very much to run good campaigns with the same staff that were trying to gather this information to respond to CFB.
Other members of the board have questions?
I have a question on something else.
Just staying for a moment on the late submission of documents. Did you want to make any further response on this issue?
No, just to reiterate that this documentation and the transactions that are related to it date back in some cases to 2014, 2015, and that they've been requested periodically, repeatedly since that time.
Here's how I think we're going to proceed in order not to waste time. We have not made a decision whether to accept these documents or not. And since we haven't seen the documents, and staff, I assume, has only had the briefest opportunity to skim through them, it really would not be fruitful or fair to go into great detail today. And so I think we're likely to adjourn this to our next meeting. But since we're all together here, I think it might be useful, just in order to see what the outline of an argument might look like, to give you an opportunity briefly to sort of respond to the proposed penalties, not document by document, but I mean, the most significant penalties have to do whether certain contributions were refunded. And so by categories, you can at least indicate, what these documents in your view are going to show. And I think there then will be some substantive questions on the penalties. But I think our initial inclination, and we'll decide this finally after deliberations, will not be to decide this matter today. But as I said, I think it might be useful, without having decided whether we're even going to consider these documents, to at least hear briefly what you think they would show. So I'm going to give you that opportunity now.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I would like to request that any substantive discussion be limited to the campaign's original response. It's really not, we have not had, this was submitted 18 hours ago. We have not had the opportunity to review it. We're not going to be prepared to respond to any arguments that they make today.
No, I understand that. And your lack of response will not in any way prejudice the staff, the CFP's position on this. It's just that in trying to determine whether to consider these documents, since we haven't looked at them yet, and probably won't until you've had a chance to look at them, it's really just to give us a sense of what's there without in any way constituting the argument on the merits. If we decide to accept the documents and have an argument on the merits at our next meeting, we'll redo this and you'll have a full opportunity to respond. This is really just to give us a sense from their perspective of what's in these documents, since we haven't seen them at all. Is that okay with other members of the board? Okay, go ahead.
So for violation 1, failure to provide bank statements, we just have the bank statements there. For violation 3, failing to demonstrate compliance with cash receipts, reporting, and documentation requirements, we have exhibits. What is it? Deposit slip copies. This is for violation 3.
That would be exhibit X. Exhibit X. Those are all the deposit slips.
Yeah. Oh, that's the deposit slips they're asking for.
Yeah.
So we have the deposit slips that were asked for violation 3. Violation 5 and 6 are actually together. I think they were delineated as a violation 5, but it actually includes violation 5 and 6, which include all of the refunds that were needed and statements and documentation that some of the contributions we received were actually not corporations, LLCs, or partnerships, and any of those that were refunded. Violation 9.
We have an email from our current liaison that he basically on the 17th, the same day that it was submitted, 3 days later, he came back and indicated that the data that was submitted was not acceptable, so we'd have to resubmit. So that is the email that's included as exhibit. I want to be very specific.
It's the same as Exhibit 9 to the penalty notice, if that would be helpful. It's already been provided to the board. It's in the record.
Yes, and I have that listed as Exhibit Y.
So the largest ones are.
So the largest ones are the ones that are referenced on. We've broken it down in a letter to the attorney, to CFB, and that is on the. So we did the largest lift first, and that's violation 5, referencing. Sorry? Yeah, violation 5, we're referencing, I'm sorry, violation 5 and 6, referencing exhibits 3, 5, and 6 from Campaign Finance Board. So they're all listed here in exhibits A through I, the responses there.
So you're saying for 5 and 6, if one looked at those bank records, it would contain the relevant information that's referenced in the report as not having been provided?
For 5 and 6, when you look at the exhibits, so what we did is we broke them down by exhibits and put them all together. So for example, there was a refund that was expected. So we broke it down by exhibit and provided the canceled check and the bank statement together as Exhibit A, so that you can see specifically what happened with that particular refund.
And some of them required someone like Benga Akinebe, that it said there was, we received money from a possible partnership LLC we had to get a few of those signatures saying that that wasn't the case, that it was personal funds.
Is it your contention that these documents will show that the refunds were all timely, or were some of them made but after the date that they were to have been made by?
Indeed. So they were, according to Campaign Finance Board, not timely, but they were made.
I think some
So
were.
there are two separate violations here. One was that it wasn't timely. We left that one alone. What we are instead responding to is the fact that they were indeed made, because it says that they were not made. That's one of the findings within the list of violations.
To be clear, so just so that for the, because I think it's for the public watching, that there are two kinds of over the limit contributions, ones that are just over limit and ones that are over the doing business limit.
Yes.
And for so that the timeliness is relating to the doing business contribution.
Okay.
Right. All right. Well, as I indicated, we're going to consider whether to accept this. I really want to stress the point that the CFB staff has already made. Part of the issue here is we have rules, and the rules are intended to be complied with. And as a matter of fairness, we should expect that of everyone. And part of it is really that the rules are designed to achieve a certain amount of savings of effort. The staff of the CFB, the audit staff of the CFB, works extraordinarily hard on these audits. They are very time consuming and, as you know, very detailed. And the system works well when documents are timely submitted so that the audits can be completed and the staff can move on to the next audit and indeed the next election cycle, which is where we are now. The work, because of the number of special elections and then the anticipation of the next election cycle, the work is really overwhelming. And it is just not fair to other candidates, but also to the staff, to the audit staff, to be getting a pile of documents the day of the hearing. We've heard your explanation for it, and we will consider in deliberations whether to accept this submission. But I want to stress on the record that whether our decision is to accept or not accept the submission, we really look with great disfavor upon the practice. And it's not just you. There have been other candidates as well who come in after the deadline with additional submissions, sometimes, in fact, sometimes right on the day or the day before of the hearing. You're not the first, but it is a really bad practice which we want very much to discourage. It's not fair, and it imposes a real burden on the staff.
May I say one last thing? Because I appreciate everything that you have said in terms of fairness and the work that needs to be done, and the fact that the rules need to be followed so that this doesn't happen as often as it sounds like it may. I would just say I've been participating in CFB since 2010. It's the first time I've been in this situation. The rules actually wisely pointed out that there should be some extenuating circumstances that are considered. Not every candidate has been running for the past 2 years or so, participating in the CFB guidelines with arcane, unfortunate election rules that had campaigns out of the control of the candidate. So that's what I'm asking to be considered. That's why we're at the mercy, obviously, of the board. So I'm just hoping that those extenuating circumstances show that this particular example is different than many of the ones that are given before.
All right. Well, we appreciate that, and without prejudice to that argument, campaigns who submit things late always argue that there are extenuating circumstances, but we understand and have heard your specific and perhaps unique circumstances, and we will consider that in deliberations.
And having never been in this position before since 2010.
Got it. Did you want to say anything?
Just a reminder that the standard is extraordinary circumstances, not extenuating, and I would argue that this does not constitute an extraordinary circumstance.
Okay.
I had a minor question on not this big issue on number 9. The timely response, does anybody know why it was illegible? Because it seemed there was an attempt by the campaign to actually file timely.
I've got
so-
some copies of some of what was submitted. Just it's a few pages, but it's kind of an example. So as you can see, in addition to being dark and kind of blurry, also many of the pages are cut off. So it was actually impossible to read the entire amount of text that was there. So it was not, there was no way that we could accept this.
But within a relatively few days, the full report was resent, right?
It was about a week, I believe, and that's how the penalty is calculated based on the number of days
I
late.
understand, but it was sent pretty quickly. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've,
I actually did want to make one further comment. With regard to your recent submission, we'll observe that in our deliberations as well.
We understand.
all right. Well, thank you very much for coming, and we'll let you know whether we will consider this and whether we do or not. I guess we'll have to have a second hearing at our next meeting.
I'll be there timely.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Before we go into deliberations, let me just call Christine Parker one more time to see if she's arrived. She apparently has not.
Are you anticipating her coming? Okay.
Okay. So at this point, we will go into deliberations, and we'll see you in a few minutes. does in the sense that if you, no, it doesn't, because presumably in order to reach the term limits, all right. So we've deliberated and we're going to vote on penalties. I'm going to take the first four candidates together as a group, and then we'll vote on them, and then separately we'll deal with Jemani Williams. The board proposes to find, with respect to these four candidates, the following violations and recommends the following penalties and/or repayments. Justin Brannon, a candidate for City Council District 43. The violations are: 1, failing to report transactions in daily pre-election disclosure statements, recommended penalty $250. 2, accepting over the limit business contributions, recommended penalty $437. 3, making impermissible post-election expenditures, recommended penalty $153. 4, exceeding the expenditure limit, recommended penalty $1,116, for total penalties of $1,956. In addition, a recommended public funds repayment of $442.24, and therefore a total of penalties and public funds repayment of $2,398.24.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to note that before 42 is the final bank balance, and I would assume that for some reason that balance is, because of fees, has been reduced, it would be okay to be reduced.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you for that addition. Next, candidate Mark Gionai, a candidate for City Council District Number 13. The alleged violations are: 1, failing to report transactions in daily pre-election disclosure statements, recommended penalty $300. 2, late reporting of transactions in daily pre-election disclosure statements, violation but no penalty. 3, failing to document transactions, recommended penalty of $806. 4, accepting contribution from a limited liability company, recommended penalty $250, for total recommended penalties of $1,356. Next, Christine Parker, these are all 2017 candidate for City Council District Number 35. The alleged violations are: 1, failing to demonstrate compliance with cash receipts reporting and documentation requirements, recommended penalty $83. 2, failing to document transactions, recommended penalty $100. 3, failing to report and document basic campaign functions, recommended penalty $500. 4, accepting contributions from corporations, limited liability companies, or partnerships, recommended penalty $800. 5, making cash expenditures greater than $100, violation but no penalty, for total penalties of $1,483. Next, Hetty Powell, a 2017 candidate for City Council, District Number 28. The alleged violations are: 1, failing to report transactions in daily pre-election disclosure statements, recommended penalty $250. 2, failing to document a transaction, recommended penalty $50. 3, accepting a contribution from an unregistered political committee, recommended penalty $250, for total penalties of $550. I move the approval of those findings of violations and proposed penalties and/or public funds repayments. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. With respect to candidate Jumani Williams, a 2017 candidate for City Council District Number 45, the board proposes to deal with this in the following way. The board has decided tentatively to accept the additional documentation submitted yesterday and to ask its staff to analyze the information and to write a supplemental memo on the findings of violations and proposed penalties in light of that information, which the board will consider. And after that, we will schedule another hearing on the matter at which we will decide finally whether to actually consider the new evidence, and if so, what violations to find and what penalties to impose based on it. That may or may not occur at the next meeting because we understand the staff has much to do at this moment and we don't want to impose unreasonable deadlines on it. But hopefully the staff will be able to do this fairly promptly, and we will schedule a new hearing as is appropriate. So that I guess I should make that as a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? And it carries. We have two complaints that we need to vote on. Do you want to mention them, Amy?
First, the board received a complaint on July 24th, 2017 against the Justin Brannan campaign, alleging that the campaign failed to report expenditures. The staff is recommending that that complaint be dismissed. Also, the staff is recommending the dismissal of 3 complaints filed against the Joe 9 campaign for a variety of misuse of expenditures and unreported expenditures, and the staff is recommending that the board dismiss all 3 of those complaints against the Joe 9 campaign.
All right, I'll move to dismiss the complaints against both of these campaigns. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Then we need to consider an advisory opinion. Amy, I'm going to ask you again to explain this.
The board issued in July of 2016 an advisory opinion 2016-1, which stated that certain expenditures made by non-campaign entities that were affiliated with a candidate would be presumed to be campaign expenditures if made on or after January 1st in the election year. Once the primary election was changed from September to June in 2019, and the act was amended to provide for earlier public funds payments and earlier qualified expenditures, the staff is recommending that the board adopt a supplemental advisory opinion modifying the presumptive cutoff date that was put in AO 2016-1 to July 15th in the year preceding the election.
All right, I'll move the approval of that supplemental advisory opinion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Finally, I'll ask for a vote to go into executive session. And since we have no business that needs to come back to the public hearing to thereafter adjourn, I'll make that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. We're done for today. Thank you very much.